In a previous video, we took a look at the different accounts receivable invoices K9 offers. Now let's take a look at the payable invoices. So no doubt you looked at financial, accounts payable, and seen different invoices: purchase invoice, vendor invoice, and COD invoice. So let's take a look at the differences between them. So depending on your organization and how you work, you may use one or a combination of invoices. Different invoices perform different parts of the task, and depends on how you work is what you're going to do. So let's take a look at this chart that I created for you over here. Okay, we're going to take a look at the purchasing side this time. So you have over here 3 different invoices, as I mentioned, and you have different inventory and financial movements within those. So every invoice basically consists of 3 things. An inventory movement. On the purchasing side, it receives inventory into your warehouse. You have the financial obligation. This is where you create the debt to the vendor, basically posting the vendor invoice. And you have the payment settled. This is making the payment to that vendor. So you'll see the 3 different invoices perform different functions in that they each use a different piece of these 3. So a purchase invoice, for instance, is based on the goods receiving voucher. It's assuming that you're using that document to bring goods into the warehouse. Therefore, it doesn't do any inventory movement. If you create purchase invoices for 1,000 units, let's say, you have not affected your inventory at all. All it does is create the financial obligation. So again, it assumes that you're using the receiving document for the inventory. Now, you still may use this invoice for different types of transactions that are non-tangible, things like paying you're posting your rent invoice, let's say, or paying the petty cash kind of things, that you have throughout the day. So you may not necessarily use this purchase invoice for other things. Now, the vendor invoice performs 2 steps. It moves inventory, so it's receiving goods into your warehouse, and it creates the financial obligation, meaning the debt to the vendor. Okay. The COD invoice performs all 3. Now imagine you're paying, let's say, a construction worker to come by your office or something, or the window washers, okay? They give you an invoice, you still want to post it, you still want to have that full tracking, but you don't want to create the different steps involved. So you can create the COD invoice, and it'll basically create everything that you need to do over there. So let's take a look at how those work in detail. Okay. So let's start first of all with the normal purchase invoice. Okay. Again, the purchase invoice is based on the assumption that creating a purchase order and the receiving and things like that. Okay. Now let's go ahead and create a new receiving actually, just so we have some new records. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and itemize this out. Now again, there's different ways you can work with this document and different warehouse options and things like that that are covered in separate videos. We're just going to go ahead and go through the process over here. So I'm going to do a PO over here for one item. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and approve this. Now, again, I can pick items into different ways over here, but we're just going to do this on the typical process. And again, your statuses will differ depending on your organization setup. In my case, approve means it's a valid PO. So I'm going to go ahead and change to approve, and I'll go ahead and create this receiving document. Okay. The receiving document is basically going to be itemized on what was on the PO. Okay, and I have the ability to, again, receive in different ways. I have our put away over here for different locations, things like that. But I'm just going to go ahead and approve this receiving and bring it in with all the defaults. Okay. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and allow invoice over here. This is going to create a journal entry. Now, this journal entry contains an unbilled purchase line item. Okay, if you're using our perpetual cost of goods sold, this transaction will automatically be created and is going to go ahead and reverse once we create that invoice. So let's go ahead, again on our actions, and create this purchase invoice. Okay, now it's going to give me some options over here on what date I want to do this invoice. This is very crucial because typically your invoice that you receive from the vendor has a date on which your accounts payable clock starts. So it may not necessarily be the date that you receive the product, so this gives you the ability to choose a different date. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and use the current date over here. It's the same date that I received the product in. And there you go. It's going to itemize it for that date. Okay, now a couple of things that are required over here is the vendor invoice. Okay, so you're going to put their invoice number there. Okay, oops. There we go, invoice 123. And that's really the only thing I need to worry about. Depending on the workflow you have set up at this point, this should be hands off. Okay, the only times you may want to make changes to it is if a vendor bills you a different price than you assumed on the PO, things like that. You can make changes, but generally speaking, you want to get this to a point through the workflow that this is really just an on and off switch, and you're going to go ahead and post this invoice. Okay, if everything is well, you'll get, of course, the green notification. You'll see that the temporary invoice number converted to a real invoice number, and we'll have a journal entry over there that we can open up and take a look at. And of course, the journal entry will go ahead and reverse that unbilled purchase transaction. So that's essentially this process over here, okay, involving the purchase invoice. Okay, of course, next you would pay that invoice, but we'll hit that on a separate video. So now let's take a look at the vendor invoice itself. Okay, so again, remember that vendor invoice will move inventory. So let's say I went to, I bought something on an account at Home Depot, let's say. So I can create this transaction so I pay them. So let's actually go ahead and create a new one in this case. Okay, we'll use that same vendor. And I'm going to go ahead and itemize this out. Now, another way you can open this is through the purchase order directly to an invoice, which we'll hit that in a moment over here. I'm going to go ahead and create a line over here. And of course, we have a bad pricing over there. So let's go ahead and update that. So we get a notification there. There we go. Now we're okay on that one. Okay, you can't buy something at a negative amount. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. Everything is fine over here. I'm going to go ahead and post this vendor invoice. Okay, and of course, I get a notification because I did not put this vendor invoice number in there. So let's go ahead and create something in there. And I'll go ahead and post this. Okay, and there we go. We get a posted invoice. I can go ahead and take a look at the journal entry. And we'll see that there is no unbilled purchase transaction because it is not necessary in this case. Okay. So now the other way I can do it is, of course, going right from a purchase order to a purchase invoice. Okay, again, this is handy in a scenario where I did go to Office Depot, let's say I bought something over there and I need to pay them on my account. So I'm going to go ahead, create this Crocker and Associates invoice again, start the PO rather. Okay, I'll itemize this out. And there we go. From here, I'm going to choose my actions. Either create or receive and create a vendor invoice. You'll see that they're both grayed out because I haven't changed the status. Now, there are different ways that you can work with K9 and what options you can allow depending on the workflow. So those are something that will be slightly different on your system. And there's a separate video for workflows and how all of that works. But basically, I'm going to go ahead and create this vendor invoice over here. Okay. Now again, vendor invoice differs from the purchase invoice in that I'm creating an inventory movement. Okay, remember my PO doesn't move any inventory. It's just a promise that I'm going to buy it. So there we go. Again, this should be on and off. I'll go ahead and post it, and that's it. Oh, if I didn't put in payment installments over there or payment terms, I'll get that notification. Otherwise, you're good to go. The final one we're going to take a look at is this COD invoice. Okay, cash on delivery invoice. This is basically cash and carry, but in reverse. In this case, I have to pay the vendor before I can close this out. So again, this will receive inventory, this will create the debt to the vendor, and this will require me to pay them as well. So it performs all three steps. So if I'm going to go ahead and select my vendor over there, okay, I do have a vendor invoice that I still need to notify over there regardless of what type it is. And I'm going to go ahead, itemize this out. Okay. Let's create a realistic price over there. Okay. And that's it. If I try to post this now, it'll fail because the amount paid is not equal to the final price. Now, I can see over here what my final price is and what my amount paid is. And I should have those equal. So again, if I go to payments over here, I have my different payment options. Let's go ahead and pay cash at this transaction. It's $10. I'm going to save this. Now, you can create as many payments as you want as long as the total equals the final amount. You can't underpay these invoices. So I'm going to go ahead and post this over here. In this case, I received an error message because I neglected something over here. Again, it's our demo environment, so there's all kinds of issues and craziness in there. So I'll go ahead and I'll post this. And I'll go ahead and post this once I choose the bank account. See, even I forget things. This is basically where the money is coming from. Now, there's different ways to work with credit cards and banks and petty cash and things like that that are covered in their separate videos. But I'm going to go ahead and pay from this bank account over here, and I'll go ahead and post this transaction. Okay. And there we go. It'll create all the transaction over here, and it'll post it in our journal entry right over there. Okay. So that's basically our COD invoice. Okay, that is the whole process. Again, different ways to do purchasing, receiving, and vendor invoicing. If you're unsure about anything, as always, contact your implementer. Thank you.